Welcome. Before you read a single word of this story, understand one thing. This is not a story about a company, this is a story about what happens when the most important person in the room is the one nobody thought to look at. It is about pride that nearly cost everything, about silence that held more strategy than any boardroom speech, about the moment a man stopped performing leadership and finally started practicing it. Nathaniel Voss had the title, he had the history, he had 11 years of sweat poured into something he built from nothing. But Priya Menon had the answer. She had always had it, she was just waiting for someone to stop talking long enough to hear it. This story will make you think about the people sitting 12 feet from your office door. It will make you think about the ideas that never got a chance because they came from the wrong job title. It will make you question every assumption you hold about who the leader in the room actually is. Read it slowly, some of it will be uncomfortable, that is the part that matters most. The weight of a sinking ship. The Monday morning light came through the office windows like something apologetic, pale, thin, arriving sideways as if he did not want to disturb what was already broken inside those walls. Nathaniel Voss stood at the glass entrance of Voss Transit Group's headquarters and looked at the lobby like a man returning to a house fire. The Monday morning light came through the office window like something apologetic, pale, thin, arriving sideways as if he did not want to disturb what was already broken inside those walls. Nathaniel Voss stood at the glass entrance of Voss Transit Group's headquarters and looked at the lobby like a man returning to a house fire he had started himself. He was 44 years old. He had built this company from a single delivery van and rented desk in a shared office in Birmingham. For 11 years, Voss Transit had gone quickly but steadily into a regional logistics operation with 200 employees, 40 vehicles and contracts with some of the largest retail chains in the Midlands. And now on a Monday in October, it was rotting from the inside. He pushed through the glass door and nodded at the receptionist, a young man named Theo, who had recently stopped making eye contact during greetings. Nathaniel noticed he noticed everything these days and did nothing about any of it. His office was on the third floor. He took the stairs, which he always did, not for fitness, but because the elevator gave him too much time to think at that. Just before the corridor bent toward his office, he passed the cluster of desks where his senior coordinators sat. Two of the chairs were already empty. It was not yet 8 in the morning. On his desk were 3 envelopes, wide sealed, arranged in a neat row, as if someone had placed them deliberately to be found all at once. He sat down, read each one, and set them face down. 3 resignations. 2 of them were people he had hired personally. The third was someone Priya had recommended 2 years ago and who had turned out to be better than anyone Nathaniel had selected in the past decade. Priya Menon appeared at his door at exactly 8:15, which was when she always appeared. She was 36. Had been with him since the company's 4th year and had a habit of carrying 2 netbooks everywhere she went. One was for meetings, the other nobody had ever seen her open in public. She knocked on the open door once slightly, the way she always did when she already knew the answer to the question she was about to ask. "You saw them?" she said. "I saw them." She stepped inside and closed the door behind her. She did not sit, she rarely sat in his office uninvited. Gordon wants to meet at 10. He said it is important. Nathaniel exhaled slowly through his nose. Gordon Fels was the company's chief financial officer, a precise and bloodless man who communicated entirely in percentages and projections. Whenever Gordon used the word important, he meant catastrophic. Tell him 11, Nathaniel said. Priya nodded and left without another word. The meeting with Gordon happened at 11 as requested. It lasted 40 minutes and covered a great deal of ground, none of it comfortable. Gordon placed a bound report on Nathaniel's desk, opened it to a page marked with a small orange tab, and walked him through the numbers with the calm of a man who had already emotionally detached from the outcome. The company had lost 2 of its 4 largest retail contracts in the previous quarter. A third contract was under review after a series of delayed deliveries caused by an outdated routing system that Nathaniel had been remaining to upgrade for 18 months. Operating costs had climbed 22%, revenue and dropped 31%. The reserve fund, which had once been something Nathaniel mentioned proudly in board meetings, was now a figure Gordon circled in red and said nothing more about it. 60 days, Gordon said, closing the report. Perhaps 70 if we freeze discretionary spending entirely and defer the vehicle maintenance cycle. Nathaniel started at the circled number. We can recover this. The maths does not support that view, Gordon replied, without cruelty, which somehow made it worse. The math is not about the whole picture. In a business context, Gordon said quietly, the math is most of the picture. After Gordon left, Nathaniel sat for a long time doing nothing in particular. He pulled up his email and did not read it. He looked at the 3 resignations, letters still face down on the corner of his desk, and did not turn them over. The problem with Nathaniel was, which he had been told in various ways by various people over the years, was that he made excellent decisions in good conditions and catastrophic ones under pressure, and the pressure now was immense. He spent the rest of the afternoon doing what he always did when the ground shifted beneath him. He called 3 people who agreed with him, restructured a small operational detail that nobody had asked him to touch, and sent an email to the whole company about resilience and commitment that managed to say very little while using a considerable number of words. Priya read the email from her desk outside his office and wrote one line in the second notebook, the one nobody saw. Then she opened her laptop and began working on something that had no assigned task number, no deadline, and no approval from anyone. She worked until 9 in the evening. The office had long emptied. The cleaning crew had come and gone. The pale October light had been replaced by the yellow haze of the car park lamps below. She cross-referenced 6 months of supplier invoices, mapped 3 underperforming road clusters, identified a redundancy in the middle management layer that was costing the company nearly £90,000 a year in duplicated functions, and outlined a recognition strategy for 2 contracts that had been renewed passively for 4 consecutive years without ever being seriously examined. She compiled into a single document, 31 pages, clean, precise, argued carefully without arrogance. She did not put her name on it. She read it twice, changed 4 sentences, and at 9:47 she sent it to the Nathaniel's work email from an address she had created specifically for that evening. The subject line read, a different picture of the same numbers. Nathaniel was home by then, sitting in his kitchen with a glass of water he had not touched, scrolling through nothing on his phone. His email notification appeared. He almost ignored it. He opened it because the subject line was unusual and he was tired enough to be curious rather than dismissive. Read the first page. Standing up in his kitchen, he sat down for page 4. By page 12, he had pulled out a pen and begun underlining things. He did not sleep that night, not because he was anxious, but because for the first time in several months, he was thinking rather than reacting. And somewhere in the space between those two things, a company that had been sinking quickly for a year began, without anyone yet realizing it, to find something solid beneath its feet. The woman behind the curtain. The Tuesday morning arrived with more confidence than Monday had managed. The sky over Birmingham was a flat, even grey and kind that does not threaten rain, but simply refuses to offer anything warmer. Nathaniel was at his desk by 7:40, which was unusual. Priya arrived at 8:15, as always, carrying her 2 notebooks and a coffee. She had made in the small kitchen on the second floor and found him already waiting for her. He had printed the document, all 31 pages. He had used 3 different colored pens on it, and there were small stars drawn in the margins next to certain paragraphs, which was something Priya had never seen him do with any paperwork in 6 years. Close the door, he said. She closed it and sat down in the chair across from his desk, which she had not been invited to do, but which the situation clearly required. She placed her notebooks on her knee and waited. This came from you, he said. It was not a question. She did not look away from him, it did. So Nathaniel placed both hands flat on the document as if studying it. Why did you not put your name on it? Because if I had, Priya said, you would have read it as a suggestion from your assistant rather than as an analysis of your company, and those are 2 entirely different documents even when the words are identical. He was quiet for a moment. The car park below was beginning to fill. Someone in the corridor outside laughed at something. The ordinary sounds of a company that did not yet know it was being saved. The supplier renegotiations on pages 9 through 14, he said, you think those are genuinely achievable? I think 3 of the 4 are not only achievable but overdue. The 4th is a stretch but worth attempting, because the worst outcome is that they say no and nothing changes, which is already the current situation. Nathaniel leaned back in his chair. He had the look of a man who had spent a night being quickly restructured by an argument he could not defeat. I am going to bring in an external consultant this week. The board has been pushing for it. A man named Donovan Ark. He audits mid-sized companies in crisis and tells them what they cannot see from the inside. I know who is, Priya said. I want you to work alongside him. She kept her expression level. In what capacity? In whatever capacity gets this done, Nathaniel said, and for the first time in several months there was something in his voice, and that was not exhaustion. It was not with confidence either. It was the particular tone of a man who has decided to stop arguing with reality and begun working with it instead. Donovan Ark arrived on Wednesday afternoon. He was 51, tall, and wore the expression of someone who had seen too many companies make the same 4 mistakes to be surprised by anything more. He carried a single leather bag shook Nathaniel's hand with the efficiency of a man willing by the hour, and was given the empty office on the second floor that had belonged to one of the people who had resigned on Monday. Priya introduced herself in the corridor outside that office. She told him her name, her title, and that she was available if he needed any internal documentation or background context. Donovan looked at her the way people often looked at executive assistants in crisis situations. As furniture that could speak, I will pull what I need from the finance team directly, he said pleasantly, but thank you. She smiled and walked back to her desk and opened the second notebook. What Donovan did not know and would not know until later that week was that Priya had already sent meeting requests to 3 of the company's longest standing suppliers. She had not announced this to Nathaniel because she had not needed to. He had told her to work on it. She was working on it. The distinction between asking permission and operating with trust was one she understood precisely and had spent 6 years cultivating. The first supplier meeting was a conference call on Thursday morning with the freight packaging company. The Voss Transit had been paying above market rates too for nearly 3 years. The account manager on the other end of the call, a cheerful man named Raymond who had grown comfortable with the arrangements, opened the conversation with a small talk about the weather. Priya let him finish the small talk. Then she opened a document on her screen and began calmly and without aggression to present an alternative contract structure based on current market rates, volume, commitments, and a revised payment schedule that offered the supplier faster settlement in exchange for a reduced unit price. Raymond went quiet for approximately 4 seconds, which was long enough to tell her everything she needed to know about how long it had been since anyone at Voss Transit had pushed back on this contract at all. I would need to take this to our accounts team, Raymond said carefully. Of course, Priya said, I will send you a written summary of a proposal within an hour. We are hoping to have something agreed before the end of next week. She sent the summary in 40 minutes. Lena Birch, the head of operations, found out about the supplier cars on Thursday afternoon from Raymond's account manager, who had called the operations lines to verify that the proposal had become from someone authorized to make it. Lena was a practical, nonsense woman of 48 who had been with the company for 7 years and who respected the chain of command with the devotion of someone who had once watched chores happen when it was ignored. She knocked on Priya's door with the specific sharpness of someone who had a concern and intended to raise it directly. Raymond's supplier called operations to ask if you were authorized, Lena said. I am Priya, said simply. Nathaniel authorized these calls, he did. Lena studied her for a moment. You should have looked me in before going to external contracts, operations, on suppliers' relationships. You are right, Priya said, and she meant it. I should have told you before the call, not after. That was a gap in how I handled it, and I will not repeat it. Lena had arrived prepared to argue and found there was nothing to argue against. She stood in the doorway for a moment longer than necessary. What exactly are you trying to recognize? Priya turned her screen around. Lena read for about 90 seconds. Her expression shifted in a way that was not quite approval, but was several steps closer to it than anything that had been in the room a minute ago. The payment acceleration clause on page 2 is clever. Lena said quickly, it was your team's processing speed that made it possible to offer. I used your department's performance data from the last 8 months. to build the case. Something in Lena's posture changed, not dramatically but enough. She pulled the chair from against the wall and sat down without being asked. And they spoke for the next 40 minutes about 3 other suppliers, relationship that Lena had privately thought needed attention for over a year but had never had the mechanism or the backing to address. Donovan Ark submitted his preliminary findings to Nathaniel on Friday morning. The report was thorough, professionally structured, and identified several areas of the concern that the company needed to address urgently. Midway through the document, in a section on resource allocation and unofficial leadership structures, he had written a single paragraph that read, in carefully professional language, that an individual currently operating in an administrative support role appeared to be executing functions typically associated with a director-level position, and that the company should either formalize this or address the ambiguity before it created structural confusion. Nathaniel read that paragraph twice, then he called Donovan into his office. "You are talking about Priya," he said. "I'm talking about an organizational structure that has quickly recognized itself around the person's judgment." Donovan said, "That can be a strength. It can also be a risk. It depends entirely on what you do with it." Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. Through the glass wall of his office, he could see Priya at her desk on a call, writing in a visible notebook with her left hand while her right hand scrolled through something on screen. She was doing 3 things simultaneously, and none of them were her assigned task for the day. "What would you do?" Nathaniel said. "In my position." Donovan, who did not often give personal opinions, considered the question for longer than expected. "I have audited 34 companies in the last 9 years, he said. "Most of them had the same problem. They had one person in the room who understood what was wrong and knew how to fix it, and they spent enormous energy making sure that person stayed small enough not to threaten anyone's sense of authority." He paused. "None of those companies are doing particularly well now." Nathaniel said nothing. On Friday afternoon, Priya received written confirmation from Raymond's company. They had agreed to a revised contract. The new terms represented a saving of £412,000 over the following 2 years. She read the confirmation email once, forwarded it to Nathaniel with no additional message, and went back to the second notebook. She wrote online in it, as she often did when something significant shifted. Then she closed it, straightened the items on her desk into their usual precise arrangements, and began preparing for the following week, which she already knew was going to ask more of her than any week before it had. The company that rebuilt itself. The confirmation email sat in Nathaniel's inbox for approximately 3 minutes before he forwarded it to the full board with a single line of context. By the time Priya arrived the following Monday morning, 2 board members had already replied asking for a full briefing. A third had called Nathaniel's mobile before 8 in the morning, which was something that had not happened in a positive context for nearly 4 months. £412,000, the number moved through the company quickly at first. The way genuinely good news tends to move, cautiously, as if it does not quite trust the environment it has entered. By Tuesday, it had reached the operations floor. By Wednesday, Q at the reception desk was holding his head slightly differently when he greeted people in the morning. Something had shifted, not everything, not yet, but something real and structure had moved. The way a foundation settles differently after a long rain, and the people inside the building felt in the specific way that people who have been pressing themselves for a long time, feel it when they are briefly allowed to stop. Nathaniel called a company-wide meeting for Thursday morning. He booked the large conference room on the ground floor, the one with the long table that stated 30 and additional chairs along the wall for the rest. It had not been used for a full staff meeting in 11 months. Priya arranged the room the evening before, not because it was her job to arrange rooms, but because she wanted the chairs against the wall room removed and replaced with additional table seating so that nobody in the room would feel like a spectator. Nathaniel stood at the front of that room on Thursday morning and looked out of 140 people, the one who had stayed, and he did not open with a slide presentations or financial summary or any of the structured formality he usually reached for when he was uncertain. He said, "Most of you have been carrying this company on your own patience for the better part of a year. I want to acknowledge that before I say anything else, because it is true and I have not said it clearly enough." The room was very still. The work that began to return things around this month did not come from the board. It did not come from the external consultant. Through Donovan has been valuable in ways I will come back to it. Came from Priya Menon, who has been sitting 12 feet from my office for 6 years and operating at a level I was too comfortable to properly recognize. Priya was seated near the middle of the table. She did not look down or away. She had Nathaniel's gaze steadily. The way she had most things, with calm of someone who had done with work and had long since stopped needing the acknowledgement while still being willing to receive it gracefully. Priya identified what was wrong, built the case for how to fix it, and began fixing it before anyone gave her permission to do so. Nathaniel continued, "That is not a small thing. That is the reason this company is still having this meeting." There was a pause, and then the room did something it had not done in a long time. It filled with the particular warmth that only comes when people who have been quickly worried together are briefly allowed to feel something other than worry. Gordon Phelps was not in that meeting. He had sent his apologies this evening before, setting a prior commitment which everyone understood to mean that he had heard enough about the direction of things to the uncomfortable attending. What nobody except Nathaniel knew on Thursday morning was that Gordon had already made a separate call earlier that week. Not to Nathaniel directly, but to a private equity firm based in London that had been circling Wars Transit for the better part of 2 years. The firm was called Harvey Capital. They had made 2 previous approaches, both of which Nathaniel had declined without much deliberation. The third approach arrived not as call to Nathaniel, but as a formal letter delivered to the company's registered address on Friday morning. 2 days after the staff meeting addressed to the board of the directors, rather than to the chief executive, Nathaniel read the letter in his office with the door closed. The offer was serious. The valuation was not insulting. Harvey had clearly been watching the company's recent activity and had timed their approach with the particular calculations of people who understood that business showing early signs of recovery was more valuable than one in full collapse, but still cheaper than one that had fully stabilized. He read it twice and then walked it down to Priya's desk and placed it in front of her without a word. She read it once. "When did Gordon contract them?" she said. Nathaniel looked at her. "What makes you think Gordon contracted them?" "The timing and the board address," she said. "If Hardwick had initiated this independently, they would." She had asked him a direct question about the structural issues in the company's middle management layer, and he had given her a direct answer, and she had pushed back on one element of it with a specific piece of data he had not considered and he had realized, in the moment of being corrected accurately by someone whose title read executive assistant, that the title was the least useful piece of information he had been given since arriving. He had since submitted a revised addendum to his audit report. It recommended the formalization of Priya's operational role, the restructuring of the middle management layer along the lines she had outlined in her original anonymous document, and a past approach to contract recognition that combined her supplier strategy with Lona's operational knowledge. He had also in her sanctions at the end that he had not been asked to include written a short paragraph noting that the company's greatest risk going forward was not financially but organizational, specifically the risk of reverting to the structural habits that had created the original crisis once the immediate pressure had passed. By the end of the month following the staff meeting, 3 new contracts had been signed. One was a regional grocery chain that Lena had been in conversations with for 2 years without ever quite closing. The other 2 come through a referral network that Priya had been quickly cultivating by maintaining relationships with contacts Nathaniel had met at industry events and then never followed, had met at industry events and then never followed up with. She had followed up with all of them. She had kept notes. She had sent relevant information at appropriate intervals. She had treated potential relationships as if they were worth standing even when there was no immediate return, which was not a strategy anymore, had asked her to pursue and which had cost the company nothing except her own attention and time. The board meeting at the end that month was the first one in over a year that Nathaniel did not enter with the specific tensions in his jaw that Priya had learned to read a sign to keep his schedule lighter for the rest of the day. He entered it with the Harwick letter, a counterposition prepared with Genovan's backing and a 12-month plan that Priya had authored and that he presented without once softening the attribution. Gordon Fell submitted his resignations 2 days after that board meeting. It was a single page, professionally worded, and arrived in Nathaniel's inbox at 6 in the morning. Nathaniel read it, replied with a brief and courteous acknowledgement, and forwarded it to Priya with a note that said simply, "We will need to talk about the CFO." Priya replied within 4 minutes, "I have 3 names. 2 are excellent. 1 is outstanding. Let me know when you want to go through them." The promotion was formalized on a Friday afternoon in late November. Chief Operating Officer, the letter was signed by Nathaniel and countersigned by 2 board members, one of whom had initially questioned whether Priya had the seniority for the role and had then read Donovan's audit addendum and the 3 signed contracts and the supplier recognitions outcomes and had stopped questioning it. Priya read the letter at her desk, folded it carefully and placed it in her bag. Then she opened the second notebook, the one nobody had ever seen her open in public, and wrote something in it. She closed it and sat for a moment, looking out the window by the car park below, which was full in the way it had not been full for most of the past years. Nathaniel found her there when he came out of his office 20 minutes later. He stood beside her desk and looked out the same window. "I almost sold it," he said. "I know, not just to Harwick. I almost gave up on it. 3 or 4 times in the last year I sat in that office and thought that what about it feels like to simply stop." Priya was quiet for a moment. "What stopped you?" He thought about it honestly, which was something he had learned to do more often in the past 2 months. I think I kept believing that problem was solvable. I just could not find the shape of the solution. The solution was always there, Priya said. It just needed someone to be allowed to show it to you. Nathaniel looked at her. I should have looked sooner. Yes, she said, without cruelty and without false comfort, in the direct and generous way that she said most true things. But you looked. Outside, the last of the day's vehicles were returning to the depot. The routing system ran quicker now. The numbers moved in the better directions. The company that had been 60 days from collapse was not the same company it had been. Not because everything had changed, but because the right things had changed in the right order, guided by someone who had understood the whole picture long before anyone thought to ask her what she saw. The second notebook sat in Priya's bag on the way home that evening. She did not open it on the train. She looked out the window at the city moving past and through. About the following week, she would bring new problems, as all weeks did, and which she was already quickly preparing for. If you are a leader of a founder, stop and ask yourself honestly, who in your team has never been given the room to show you what they actually see? Schedule that conversation this week. Not a performance review, not a check-in, a rare conversations where you close the laptop and ask, what do you think we are missing? It may be the most valuable meeting you have all years.